There we go. Hello, welcome to Millicent Unplugged. I'm Karen Chertok, the Director of Education at Millicent Rogers Museum, joined by Sarah Francis, a photographer, author, speaker, and museum friend and volunteer moderator. I would like to start this evening's program with land acknowledgement here at the Millicent Rogers Museum. We are located on ancestral lands of the Tiwa-speaking people known today as the Red Willow people of Taos Pueblo. We strive to deepen our relationship with the Red Willow people through collaboration while acknowledging and honoring the complex history of the Red Willow people, past, present, and future generations. We express gratitude to this land, and we honor the Taos Pueblo elders and ancestors who have stewarded this land since time immemorial. Welcome to Art of the Book, from spoken word to publication. Books, from thought to utterance to words on a page, the literary world beckons novice and expert alike to connect, communicate, articulate, posit, and ponder. Notes to self, essays of angst, paragraphs, chapter, and verse. How do we get there, and who will we meet? Thank you for joining us this evening in this conversation about processes and presentation of writings and readings of words. I'd like to welcome our guests. Polly Letofsky is best known for being the first woman to walk around the world. It took 5 years to complete her walk and another 6 years to write the book about it. After a series of bad choices in her publishing journey, she launched into a deep dive to study the industry. A passion was unleashed, and the result was the launch of a new publishing model in My Word Publishing, a self-publishing consulting company. Polly has been recognized as Woman of the Year by the Colorado Businesswomen, and My Word Publishing has recently been submitted into the U.S. Congressional Record, recognizing their new publishing model that helps protect authors. So welcome, Polly.
Thank you.
And Mary Waleski is a book marketing consultant specializing in online marketing. She founded By the Book Marketing in 2005 and works with authors and independent publishers worldwide. Her author services include creating and executing book marketing plans and individual coaching for social media and marketing. She is a former president of the Colorado Independent Publishers Association. Welcome, Mary. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Jan Smith has an MFA in creative writing from Goddard College, was the curator of the Somos Summer Winter Writers Series from 2009 to 2015, and is currently the executive director of Somos. She is a 2012 recipient of an award from Southwest Writers for her short story Breasts, and a 2014 First Place Award winner for an excerpt from her memoir, Blink Like Crazy. Welcome, Jan.
Thank you, Karen.
Kelly Paschalk, as a book designer and visual artist, Kelly designs, guides, and creates space for the writer. Though her design resume extends through the decades, the heart of Kelly's work is the creative process. Together, she collaborates with writers while calling on an extensive network of editors, proofers, and printers to bring the written word to a writer's public. So Sarah, if you'd like to get the conversation rolling, I'm gonna put all of the websites of these ladies into our chat for our viewers. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, listeners. Today we have 4 just super high-powered women in the publishing realm. And I suppose as now a publisher in my own mark, I should conclude myself. But what happens today? The word, everybody's got stories, everybody's got words, and what do we do with them? So often they get left by the wayside. And these people that we have to talk to you today, they are all part of that giant black hole that happens between the word and actually seeing it in print somehow. And it doesn't matter whether you need 1 book or 20, 200, or 2,000. there's a place for everybody. And the best part of this is that these days it is much easier to take one's own words, a memoir being a really big thing at the moment, much easier to take one's words and go somewhere. But there's lots of detail. And we girls are detailed people. And I want to start, if I might, Polly, because you have this new procedure. It used to be that independent publishing was kind of a nasty word for authors. And then it became hybrid publishers. And unfortunately, a great deal of that was not maybe exactly a scam, but not very advantageous to the author. And Polly, you really jumped in there. And remember, we've got pieces of the pie here. We've got Polly, who does a whole bunch of different things for authors. Kelly, who is really an expert designer with the idea of complex image and text, as am I. Mary, who tells you what to do with it. And actually, by rights, what Mary does is before you even put the word to the paper, practically, and Jan wraps it all up. So we've got every place. Okay, sorry for the long introduction. Polly, talk to us about what's different about what My Word Publishing does.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the hybrid publishing because that's the route that I went, thinking I was doing the right thing. So first, I don't want to pretend that big publishers were throwing themselves at me, the big traditional thing, but I was talking to two of them. Now, I just walked around the world. It was a lifelong dream, took 5 years to do, right? And 6 years to write the book. And so I'm talking to a couple of them, and both of them said the same thing. Well, we like it, but we want some romance. Could you throw in some romance? And I'm like, well, there wasn't any. What, you want me to make it up? Like, well, if you could take some literary license, sure. And I was, oh man, because I made myself a promise I would tell an honest story. Even when it made me look bad, I was going to tell an honest story, but I can't toss in, these made up romances. I think the eat, pray, love thing, I was coming off the tail end of that too. So that's probably why they were asking. So I really thought, I'm not going to like this at all, for someone to essentially control the story. And the self-publishing in 2007 and 8 was just really still bad. You could open the book up and the pages would fall out. I mean, it was just awful, right? And so I heard this thing called partner publishing. Oh, that sounded swell. We'll sit in coffee shops and sip on our chai and talk about where the characters will go, which direction. And I knew right away that I was in trouble because once you sign a publishing contract, there's no end date, It's like a marriage. You sign on, I do. And then you're not getting out of that unless there's a lot of screaming and crying and attorneys involved and this kind of thing. There is no exit date, right? But I soon found out, of course, that hybrid publishing, same as partner publishing, there's not a single thing they can do for you that you cannot do yourself today. Yet they maintain half your rights, half your royalties forever, unless you start screaming and crying and getting attorneys involved and a lot of money, etc. Right?
Oh, hold short, just one moment there. People don't necessarily know what this means. A hybrid publisher offers the individual author a menu of services in return for some level of coaching and working through it and getting the book printed and some distribution and PR. And generally, it is all very expensive, each item to the author. And in the end, Mario's going to tell you that only the author really sells the book into the hands of the reader. And so hybrid, a great many firms really don't do the author justice. Sorry for interrupting. Please go ahead.
Yeah, well, it does mean different things to different companies. So it's pulling more into what you're talking about, where you have a menu and you check them. But a lot of times what it means is they own the sales and distribution rights, which means their publishing company logo, imprint is on your book. It's their ISBN that's used. Okay? So sales and distribution rights means all the sales go through that company. They take their portion of the agreed upon royalties, and you get your portion of the royalties every 6 months. Okay? I'm saying there's no need at all for that because they don't have special relationships with distributors. They don't get bigger royalties, nothing else. So why would you give your rights and royalties away forever? It's not until X date. So there's no reason in the world these days why the royalties shouldn't go straight to you and whatever. So the difference is when I started My Word Publishing, it was that epitome of the start of the business when I'm sitting at Panera's and you grab a napkin like, yeah, someone got a pen I could borrow, and you start writing down, what do people hate about the publishing world? And I'm like writing down things like contracts and, too big a royalty, blah, blah, blah. I said, I'm going to start a publishing company that's the opposite of all that. So how do we do it then? We essentially help an author start their own company. So we've done close to 1,000 books now. And those 1,000 authors have their own publishing company, their own ISBN, all their own ownership. We set up their accounts in their name. So royalties, even if it's 1 penny, which does happen, by the way, if you're selling an ebook in India and then with the exchange rates, you're getting 1 penny, it lands in your bank account. I've gotten those before. But it doesn't go through us, doesn't bypass through us. So we set it up so the author owns everything. And what do? How do we get paid? We get paid for the project. They pay us. So it's very much the model of, say, a general contractor who's renovating your kitchen. That general contractor knows the details and they know the legalities and the right people and the timelines and the government necessities, but they don't own your kitchen. So they're paying, the general contractor to manage everything. And, I say, I'm your manager. I'm your good cop, I'm your bad cop, and I'm your troubleshooter. And I will manage everything. But everything is owned by you. So that's kind of the difference.
That's a very astute way of putting it. And oftentimes we in the Independent Publishing Association in Colorado, we say that you have to get the cart before the horse. Everybody wants to write, but the things that you have just talked about are important to know practically before you put word on paper. And Mary, that's what you would say, is you've got to decide who is the audience, how you're going to publicize this book. Talk about how you present this to your people in advance so they go down the right path.
Well, a lot of times they've already written the book, which is fine. And, when I talk to people about it, the question I start off with is usually, well, who did you write this for? And why did you write it? Because a lot of times a book is a passion project, what we call, the book that's been hiding in your brain for 25 years and you finally decide you're going to write it and publish it. And, I think that's wonderful because a lot of people stop at that one book, but then there's the people that are kind of doing it part-time. They're writing books, but they're also working. And then there's the person who's really serious about making it into a full-time endeavor. So, those are the 3 levels that I kind of like to determine, going in, because that also depends on how many resources they want to put into producing and promoting the book. And so, there's really no one right answer when you talk about it. It just depends on that individual. But, once they start telling me about the book, I usually start asking those questions of, well, who is the audience? And if they say everybody, I have to tamp them down because if a book is for everyone, it's for nobody. And Polly's probably gotten that answer more than one time. And then there's also genres, within the genres. Like, we were just talking earlier about, Polly had sent me a client who wrote a 1970s rock and roll romance. Okay. And there are subgenres within romance. And there's also different attributes of the types of people who read romances. A lot of people who are really into romances are reading 2 or 3 a week, and they're reading them electronically. So we're probably looking at the ebooks being more popular than print books. We're also looking at, this is a racy 1970s romance. The people who are reading the Amish ones are probably not going to pick this one up. So it really, it comes down to kind of a fascinating connect the dots, who's the right book, the right audience for this book. It's one reason I've never been bored in the 20 years I've been doing this.
Yes, it's all about the audience. And
Yes.
one of the most essential things for the authors is, Jan, what you do with your conference and trying to instruct authors. It's not all about technique. It's about the big picture. What's on for your conference this year that you think will be just begin to promote people into getting their own book in print?
Take a little different tack because my expertise is not in the publishing field at all. The purpose of our conference, this is going to be our 8th summer conference. And basically what happened was that the University of New Mexico ran a writers' conference for 17 years at the Sagebrush Inn. And then for a variety of different reasons, it stopped. So I saw an opportunity on a smaller scale for Somos to offer a 3-day. They used to do like a week, which included 2 weekends, a weekend on either end. And we do 3 days. And it's all about craft, which is what I know more about, and focused on different genres. Like we have workshops for poets, for fiction writers, for nonfiction writers, for memoirists, for people who write for young adults and children, for screenwriters. We have a keynote speaker who sort of sums up the field that they're working in that year. And we also have faculty readings, and then we have what's called brunch. We have, it's called lunch, roundtable discussions. And that's when we bring someone in to talk about publishing, editing, revising, some of those kinds of things.
Thank
But
you.
my background is more about that. I did not do any creative writing until I moved to Taos, which was in 2008. So my foundation is all about learning the craft, because anybody can write a book, but it could be just crap. And I don't mean to be crude, but no matter who they think their audience is, I think it's just so important that you immerse yourself. You don't all have to get an MFA like I did, but join a writing group, have a writing mentor, commit to spending money on a really professional editor, and a proofreader and a copy editor and a content editor, so that when you have your final product, it's something that, you're really proud of and is ready to go out into the world.
What are
It
the
really
dates?
does start with a good
I'm
book.
gonna jump in, Sarah, just for a second, because in listening to Jan, I want to point out, because to some of our audience or our future viewers of the recording, just to bring a deeper understanding to what Somos is in the context of Taos. So Taos being a very small town, and Somos is very well known as sort of the literary hub of Taos.
Mhm.
It's where the writers gather, and yes, you have that element of making those connections with editors and bringing a book to fruition, but you also have a very unique element of being sort of an incubator, a safe space where writers can explore presenting their work to the public and
Mhm.
getting feedback, whether it's in a writer's group or simply a reading that happens and the general public comes to that. So in that regard, circling back to this idea of audience, the idea of as audience with a lot of people and asking, who is this book for? And I know that Kelly kind of works through pieces of the writer's angst, the feelings around writing and bringing something to the public, which is a very vulnerable place to be. I wonder if you can speak to that a little bit, Kelly.
Well, I think what Jan said about craft is so important, but before someone even gets to that point, they have to be able to really value their own words and know why they're writing the book, who they're writing it for, but mostly why they're writing it for themselves even. And maybe it is part of the audience has something to do with your why. I like to work with authors who really have a message that brings more love and light into the world, or more beauty. It might be a fine art photography book or an art book, or it might be somebody's stories, whether they're beautiful or just meaningful and have a message to share that might help somebody else. So, especially with stories that might tap into somebody's memories that are hard to work through, you might just, as an author, you might just need somebody to hold that space in a way that it's not giving them advice, because I'm not a writer and I'm not a teacher. I write a little bit. I'm not a professional writer. But just somebody that can say, keep going, or like a good editor would ask, oh, could you fill in the gaps here? Why did you bring this into the story? And go a little deeper. So I might do that, or I might just sit silently and like coach them along. If I offer a writer's retreat to somebody, it might mean like, let's sit down, figure out what your writing practice will be even when you leave Taos. What are you going to do when you go home? Are you going to set some time aside from your family and your job to write? It might mean that we went so deep, that person went so deep into their story, they now need a little break. Let's take a walk by the gorge and get some introspection time.
What's
I don't want to
just
go
been
on too long.
what you've all said right there is that writing and creating a book is like an octopus. There are all these tentacles all of the time. And yes, obviously the word, as Jan says, you have to have the craft. And yet, if you're going to be serious about a book, you need to know who the audience is and how you're going to proceed. And so these things overlap, and it can drive somebody a little nuts as an author. And therefore, what each one of you does is a terrific boon to get the author on the right track. Jan, what are the dates of your conference this year?
July 19th through the 21st.
July 19th through the 21st, and they sign up on the web or in your store?
Yeah, on the Somos website, which is www.somostaos.org.
We should also mention, Jan, you said that you'd won an award from Southwest Writers, where I'm actually one of the board members too. They have huge craft things for authors all the time. And of course, in Denver, LitFest comes up, and I believe it starts on the 9th of June, 10 days of nonstop everything. And there are just a multitude of places. And yet one has to be picky about where one is going. And therefore, the intent is so important for the author to know after a few words are on paper. And Kelly, when you get to someone and your job is more the designing of the whole package, the beautiful cover that's going to attract attention on the bookshelf, and making sure that everything is perfect in that regard. And tell us more about the Portraits of Taos books, the
Oh,
series.
sure. Well, Jan knows we're working on Taos Portraits 2 right now. I'm working with the photographer Paul O'Connor. And what it is, it's a large, and I mean large, it's 12 inches by 15 inches hardback book, all archival. There's 60 portraits, and this is the second book. We did book 1 with Bill Whaley, rest in peace, in 2012. And now this book we've just begun, well, we're fundraising now to get it to press, but the book is pretty much put together. It's 60 portraits of Taos characters, artists, and people in the art scene, some writers, some sculptors and painters and photographers. And then each portrait has an accompanying essay that's written by somebody who knows them well. So it's a real personal look into the portrait subject rather than a resume. It's something that people might not know about that person, that gives a glimpse into who they really are. And it's beautiful photography, black and white portraits that just amazing.
To me, that is way valuable. It's not a monograph, which is a flip the pages. Not that you don't study them, but with the essay, that's a real extraordinary image and text collaboration, and it invites the reading. And so, you know, your audience, that's exactly, Mary, she's got her niche, doesn't she?
Oh, definitely. It sounds like a fascinating book.
Oh, it's beautiful. And it's such
Yeah.
a tribute to Taos, you know.
Mhm.
Taos is a really interesting place. You'll be at a coffee shop and sitting next to somebody and just striking up a conversation. Before you know it, you find out that person is like a very famous artist. But they don't, it doesn't matter. They might be driving an old beater and, like, you know, and there's some international artists in the book that are Taos based, like Larry Bell and Ken Price and Ron Cooper was in book 1, and Dennis Hopper. And then there's people that are just really artists at heart that maybe unless you live in Taos, you might not have ever heard of those people, but they all have a story to tell.
Sounds like you should be pitching it to art museums.
Yeah, and the first book is actually in it's in several big museums. It's in France, it's in New York, it's in California,
Oh, very nice.
Denver. I think it's in
Yeah.
Denver. It should be.
Well, we have a nice art museum, so yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the kind of specialty book that you really do have to think long and hard about how you want to sell it, because the practical stuff is usually what I and other and even publishers and distributors really have to think about is how are you going to list it? How are you going to ship it? How do you price it? And those are all the little petty details that we find ourselves dealing with, because it's a little bit different than if you're just dealing with a trade paperback or an ebook. You've got to think about the details. I'm working with a couple of children's books right now that are absolutely beautiful. In fact, they're done by a Santa Fe artist. Oops, I can't tell. I've got a
Oh,
I
you
got that
have the
background, so I can't. Yeah, I have to flip it down and get rid of my background here. Let's see. Choose virtual background. None. There we go. Luckily, I
Wow.
vacuumed my apartment.
Look at
But
that.
it's a gorgeous book, and there's actually 2 of them. And Paige Allen is an artist in Santa Fe. Well, she had this published overseas, and it's a very unusual size. It's quite large. We're actually selling it now on Amazon Marketplace. We had to go with Marketplace instead of KDP in order to get it on there and ship the books from the warehouses where she had them to Amazon. And, our next step is optimize the pages so people can find them, and then social media and advertising campaigns so they can start selling them.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, we have,
it's fun when you're dealing with something that's a little more than just a trade paperback.
it is. Nothing wrong with trade paperbacks either, but
No, they're my bread and butter and I love them, but I have to admit I'm a Kindle junkie. I read books on ebook now.
oh, and I love holding the book in my hand, the feel of the
Yeah, a lot of
paper.
people say that. I love it, but at the same time, I have a small apartment and I've run out of bookshelves. So I have 600 books on an ebook on an e-reader, and
Wow.
someday I may actually read them all.
Wow.
You
Hard
know,
to
have-
I
follow
had
all of
never,
that.
I had never used Kindle, and I too love holding the book in the hand and
Mhm.
was just adamant about that. And then I embarked on this journey of a master's program a couple of years ago for museum studies. And it just kind of evolved because I was determined I want my textbooks. I want my textbooks in my hand. Well, when they don't arrive and you need your book yesterday. So I did Kindle and sort of got hooked on that for certain purposes. I mean, for
Yeah.
textbooks, it was actually wonderful because um I still don't trust it though that they're going to be there, you know, when I open that up and it's still part of my library. But that is an interesting aspect of the publishing world and reaching different segments of audience.
I love that instant gratification. I can click a button and I'm reading a book.
Mhm.
That's kind of where and during the pandemic, the library was closed.
Right.
So I used their ebook collection to keep reading because I'm one of those people that always has a book going.
Mhm.
Yeah, and though it's ironic with my business, I don't have enough time to read, but I'm reading client books instead.
Yeah.
But there's a practicality to it, and how many of you like audiobooks?
I do.
I have to admit, I don't like them. I think they're a wonderful invention, but I don't enjoy listening to them.
Mm.
So I think it's great that we have different formats. I got a master's degree years ago in library science, and I thought I was going to spend my time working in a library. Well, that didn't quite work the way I thought it would. However, what I did learn was that you have to adjust formats and different ways to present information depending on your audience. And I think that's a very important consideration.
I want to read one of the chat for the purposes of future audiences. So Marge Becker is commenting that she loves holding a book in her hand. However, now with macular degeneration, I find that Kindle makes my reading possible. I can raise the font to my visual reading level. I used to say I would never have a Kindle, but I've learned never to say never. So again, to accessibility and audience, I think
Yeah.
that's something that, merits part of the discussion as well.
Yeah, Marge, I'm with you, girl. I get headaches just reading a book. It's just my eyes are bad, so I crank that thing up to 38-point font and I just read it like that.
Yeah, I bought a print copy of Killers of the Flower Moon, which I thought was an amazing book.
Yeah.
And the author appeared at my local library, and I went to go hear him speak, and it was really fascinating. But it's really hard for me to read the print book because, hey, eyesight isn't quite 20/20 what it used to be. So that's another reason I really like Kindle. I can crank up the font.
Mhm.
May I move Polly to you again here, just going in a little bit of a different direction. Can you enumerate for our audience what you consider to be the things that need to be done for a book? For instance, cover design, different kinds of editing, what you feel with your staff and your people, what is offered.
Yeah, thanks. So people come to us two different ways. One might be, listen, I have this great idea for a book, but I've never written a book before. I don't know what I'm doing. What do I do? So what I would do is get them a writing coach, right? And a writing coach and a development editor, as I'm sure all of you know, is a very almost intimate, like therapist kind of, relationship. So it's got to be the right one. It's not up to me to assign it, but it is up to me to be a matchmaker. So I will, according to the genre, timeline, personality, and knowing our editors and coaches the way that I do, I will be a matchmaker, but I'll set them up with maybe 2 writing coaches. Say, I want you to talk to these 2 people and, run with it. Then you pull into editing with that same person, development, copy line, proof edit. And we, the producers, the publishing coaches, get involved with the project when the writing coach and the author have hit first draft. So together, they write the end. And now you pull into editing, that's when we get involved as well. And we take care of things like getting them with the right cover designer and creating their publishing company, because that's how we do it. And we primarily use KDP. I don't have a relationship with them, but I find that that's the best. And I can be on a panel with anyone of you that wants to talk about Ingram Spark. So, but if that's the right thing for the author, then we go that route. So we get their accounts ready, and then we deal with layout and all the elements of, say, the copyright page. Should we have a disclaimer in there? Are there legalities to review? We have to talk all the time about copyright issues, infringement. Well, it's just one line of a Beatles song. It's like, well, okay.
Yeah, right.
Well, then it's only 1 year in prison. So,
Yeah.
nah, I'm a little facetious, but no, that's just illegal. And so I explain what, the copyright law and how, you can't just use a quote from someone's book because you cited it. Well, it's not a college paper anymore, the difference being that now you're earning money from this. But there are certainly exceptions. Did you guys know that the Happy Birthday song was not in public domain until 2-3 years ago? Isn't that crazy?
Somebody owes them a lot of money.
Yeah. So it's like, it's not just, the copyright law is so gray. It's like there's black and white and otherwise it's all gray. Black and white
And then,
is
of course,
do not use them.
And then AI is confusing all of it. A lot of newspapers are suing ChatGPT because they're using their content to train their AI software.
Wow.
So that's gonna add an additional little weird layer of confusion to the copyright laws.
Yes.
But so we spend a lot of time trying to explain copyright law too, and so we guide them through that process. And a lot of our job too is setting expectations. If someone says to me, I had no idea, fill in the blank. It's like, ugh, I've done an awful job then because, and we have notes for, we're heading into cover now. Here's what you should expect. A cover designer is not an illustrator. They are a graphic designer, right, Kelly? So, they could be an illustrator. You could get an illustrator, but then that is the cover art, not the actual cover, because there are a lot of other elements to the cover. So we set expectations. This is how it works. So they know, they're very clear when they go in. An example also is like editing. When they head into editing, I'm like, okay, once you choose your editor, it's like choosing your boyfriend. You don't just keep, dating around. I mean, you've got your editor, you stay with them. You don't bring that manuscript to the critique group and, have your boyfriend review it. You're dealing with a professional now and you stay in your lane, you and that editor, so I have this kind of tough love conversation with them as well. So, yeah, a lot of it is setting expectations.
Jan, during the conference, do your craft classes go as far as talking about the necessity of editing and style, as in Chicago style or AP style, or tell us more about the actual content of the classes this year?
Well, they don't go into the specifics of APA or the Chicago manual. That's what a proofreader would do for you. What they go into is how to the most effectively tell your story, whether it's a poem, a novel, a short story, an essay, a memoir, hybrid. What are the constructs of an effective story? And through the years, even though you can't make someone succeed, so to speak, being a writer, what you can do is teach them the craft items, character development, plot, openings, endings, stakes, conflict, tension, denouement, dialogue. I mean, there's just all different facets of the craft that you can teach, and you can give them examples from authors who are successful or have been successful. So ours is really geared toward the how to make a story engaging, and literary, because we really do focus more on the literary genres, and how to do that effectively.
Thank you. Kelly, when you get a project that you're working on, you're mentioning this rather extraordinary portrait series, now we should say, and that there's so much commentary with it. Tell us, what kind of editing do you do that editing, or are you demanding that the author bring you a completely edited, finished piece?
Well, in this case, the Taos Portraits project, I'm one of the key players. A lot of times, other projects, it will be an author, they've already written their book. Or they might contact me when they're in the process of writing it. And if they're hiring me to design their book, then I ask them to already have it edited and basically no more changes. But there's always going to be changes, because once it's in the layout, then a proofreader should look at it one more time. Just because I could have made a mistake. I could have like hit a key when I was doing a quick code, or, you know, or they might decide, oh, I missed the word "the" in this sentence. You know, it's always little things like that, that there's always something. But with Taos Portraits, we have a developmental editor, Lynn Robinson, and then we have a copy editor, and now we have a proofreader. And then also, Paul and I are both reading all of the stories as well to catch anything that might have slipped through. Although all the three people that we have are excellent. The copy editor is so meticulous, and our proofreader too. So
I want their names, Kelly. Always looking
Okay.
for good, always looking for good editors. So
Well, I'm happy
I
to
do
share.
too. I do too, because we often get called to give recommendations for different types of editors, publishers, proofers, etc. So I'd love that information.
Okay, I'll email both of you.
thanks.
Well,
Now,
and Lynn Robinson is our own Taos News Tempo.
Mhm.
editor.
Yes,
Right.
and
It's
she
small
was a
little
good
town.
friend. She was a writer at Horsefly, which was Bill Whaley's monthly publication. And after he sold Horsefly in 2011, I think we started Taos Portraits 1.
Oh, okay.
I used the designer at Horsefly for a while, and well, for a long time actually. It was like a great gig. I worked like a week out of the month, and then I had the rest of the time to do other projects. But Paul's photography was in Bill's office. So I'm like, who is that photographer? I love these photographs. And then a few years later, Paul moved back from California at the same time I did. And I went out to look at a place to rent, and it happened to be Paul O'Connor renting this place, he and his wife Tizia. I'm like, Paul O'Connor? Oh, the photographer, I'm a big fan. And we ended up becoming friends, he and his wife and I. And a few years after I rented from them, we decided to do Taos Portraits, or, well, you know, Paul decided it was time, because the first, especially in the first book, and there's a couple in the second book, there's even the Taos Moderns, because he's been photographing Taos artists since the 80s.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to be sure. Well, first, before I bring in the Q&A, I want to kind of circle around because this is Millicent Rogers Museum, Millicent Unplugged conversation, and so reaching into the community and bringing the relevance to what does this topic for this program have to do with the museum, right? So I want to share, I don't know if everybody knows, but Millicent Rogers Museum went through strategic planning a year or so ago, and we have a new mission. And our mission is that Millicent Rogers Museum partners with communities of the Southwest to share their stories, arts, and culture. So we have moved much more into the area of storytelling, telling stories, being a safe space where different aspects of community can share their stories. Why? Because the museum collection is built on arts of this region. So we want to invite those communities that create those arts to tell their own stories. So the intersections there I see really are going to begin to really weave a tapestry of a community of arts, culture, and literature. And people, when they start telling their stories and feel valued for their stories, you all in your realms are going to see some of those connections of people wanting to publish their story. So again, I really appreciate you joining in on this collaborative conversation. So now I want to shift to the Q&A because Marge is asking about funding. So bottom line for everybody is always going to be the financial piece. How do authors find funding, and where do they look for funding? Ideas on that, ladies?
Yeah, I could take
Well, I've seen GoFundMe campaigns on a frequent basis.
That's interesting.
Sorry, Polly, you were jumping in too.
Yeah, I was going to say crowdfunding, but
Yeah.
you know, that does get tricky too, because you know, someone flat out asked me, one of our authors, who could pay for his book, okay? But he said, what do you think of crowdfunding? Because, you know, it's a way to market your book too, you know, because you're
Yeah.
keeping everybody up to par in it and they are getting a book out of it. But it's hard to be asking for money, and this is coming from him. It's hard for me to ask for money though, and then they see me going off to Mexico next month with my wife, you know? So what kind of message are you sending? So where do you get the funding? I mean, you can put a book out from zero, you know, is that a good book? No, it's not, but you know, you can theoretically today. But you frankly just save. You save like anything, you know? You save up for it. And here's an example of how we do it. If our project takes maybe 9 months, right? That's a really good book. You're going through a full developmental round and then copy and proof and all this. Not all of it's due up front either, okay? So some of it's up front, and then, you know, in the middle, you pay half of the cover and half of the proof edit. You might buy an ISBN for $125 or whatever, right? So it's spread out over the course of what I like to lay out too for authors is overview. You might spend $7,000 to $12,000 to do a really good book. It's a broad range, but what kind of shape is it in? Is it 120,000 word fiction? Is it a 30,000 word nonfiction? What is it? So 7,000 to 12,000 probably. So how many books do you need to sell to go make up your production costs, right? So what that does is give people a really good vision of what they are getting into and what they need to do, and there's no surprises, which generally falls between 700 and 1,500 book sales. And that depends on your final production costs, as well as how are you selling the book? Direct to consumer with no middleman taking 40%? Or are you selling on Amazon where you're getting that royalty?
60% on general, 70% on an ebook.
Yeah. So, you know, it generally comes out. I know it's broad, but like 700 to, you know, 1,500 book sales you need to make. So if you go into this knowing you have a good platform, you can sell 1,200 books tomorrow, you know, at least you have a really good vision of what you need to do. You're not going in blind. If someone says, well, I ain't got no friends, well, I don't know what to tell you. You got no money, no friends, you probably can't.
Well, that's where marketing comes in too. You know, one thing one of my favorite types of projects is a business book, because if you're writing a book in the context of your business, the book is not really where you're going to be making your money. It's going to be in consulting. It's going to be if you're teaching workshops. It's going to be if you are selling additional products. So a book becomes an investment. It's a marketing tool, because nobody throws away a book. If you're sending a CEO a book whose company you'd like to do business with, that's a cheap marketing tool.
It
So
is.
it
And
really depends on what type of book we're talking about.
Yeah, you
Yep,
know,
I was just gonna
also,
say.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kelly. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, same with a lot of art books. The artist, I always tell people, if you're doing this book to make a lot of money, a fine art book, likely you're going to have it offset printed, so you will have to have the money up front for printing.
Right.
Just because on-demand printing isn't really there for that. I mean, it's okay. So there's a few places it's okay, but not for fine art.
No,
Not high
But
quality
on demand,
printing, no.
right.
yeah.
And
Can I
so
also, oh,
yeah,
sorry,
you
Kelly,
want to
I
have
keep-
your book to pitch to galleries or museums to get your work known, and then they buy your paintings or your photographs, you know. But also on-demand printing is, you don't have to have the money up front for printing 500 or 2,000 books. You just have to have the money for your editors and your designer and
Your setup,
marketing.
yeah. Yeah, I think print on demand was the greatest thing to happen to publishing recently, for the simple reason that when I first started doing this 20 years ago, people would call me and tell me they had 3,000 books in their garage, and my heart would go into my shoes, because they had no plan, no idea who they were going to sell it to. They had no plan, and they thought I could magically wave a wand and it would be sold. It's like, no, it doesn't work that way. So yeah, I love the fact that people don't have to have enormous quantities of books up front, unless they're selling something like, as you described, you know, a fine art book where they have to put it on a regular press.
And the
And
printing
there's also
cost for
ways.
that is far greater, of course.
Mhm.
Jan, you had a comment?
Oh, I just wanted to add, I know a little bit about funding, not for publishing, but for the art of writing. And what I always encourage my students to do is to Google all the free writing contests in their genre. That they can, if money's an issue, which it is for most of us, because those, the submission fees can be anywhere from 25 to 125 or more. So to send into contests, and then also to apply for residencies. I've had 2 residencies, one at the Vermont Studio Center and one at Anam Cara in Ireland. And that basically will give you, you know, your board, your room, and the space and time to write. So that's another way of getting funded.
Thank you. That's a really good point. And now I get a chance to toot our own horn, because contests is one of the ways that you make a book known. And here is our recent anthology, 125 Tales of Art and Life from Northern New Mexico and the Four Corners. And it's fully illustrated 4-color coffee table book. And we just won our 6th award and finalists for several more at this point. And that's how we're getting known. And like you, Kelly, volume 2 is started. And yes, this time, by golly, I do want to fund the printing cost, because I've done everything, but then you still have to pay for the print. And a high quality offset is expensive when you're talking about a coffee table book, a beautiful art book. probably a little bit more on the 4-color than you're doing duotone, I assume, for your photo book. Yes,
No, we're doing 5-color actually. It's
5-color.
4-color plus 1 Pantone
Uh-huh.
color.
To add extra black, probably.
It's more depth to the black and white
Yes,
photos.
exactly. And so that's all expensive. And my paper was top notch, and you're probably using something like a textured paper, a specialty thing, which is even higher. And so, yes, it really is necessary after you made this book of what that came from the heart, really. You've got to figure out how to maybe break even. You don't have to make money on a book that comes from the heart, but you would like it not to take away from your exchequer. Karen, do you have any more comments or questions?
There are no more questions in the Q&A, but I just was thinking as we're chatting here about Taos and the museum and just this, idea of a literary hub. And I'm wondering, Dan, you might know more than I do. Has there been like a book fair with local authors, like a large scale one in Taos? Because there are so many people who are self-publishing, local authors, famous authors. Has that existed?
Well, I've lived here since 2008, so I can't really speak to anything before then, but there's been nothing since I've lived here. They usually tend to take place in very large urban areas because they're expensive to put on. You need a convention center. You need a wide variety of books. And so like the Tucson, Arizona Book Fair is really big. The Miami Book Fair is really big.
Yeah.
And a lot of the big cities have them. What we do is we offer our faculty book sales of all their books so that if they're chosen to teach at the Summer Writers Conference, they can bring copies of their books. Somos does not take a percentage, and we have volunteers to be at the tables to sell their books.
Mhm. Well, we'll have to chat. Oh, did you have something, Kelly, to add to that?
Yeah, in 2015, actually, Bill Whaley and Becky Lenzini from Nighthawk Press and I put on a small local book fair for writers. It was in the old county courthouse with all the WPA murals around us. John Nichols spoke, and then for 2 more days, we had different local writers come up and read portions of their book, and they all had tables they could sell.
Yeah,
And that
that's
was
the kind of thing I'm asking about, I guess.
and Lyle Wright did one at Casa Benavides
Yeah,
last.
small one. Do you know how that went? Was it well received?
Yeah, Paul and I actually had a table for Taos Portraits, and
Okay.
it was just in their big dining rooms, and people set up tables with their books, and John Suazo from the Pueblo read some of his stories, and there were a few people reading. Sorry, my dogs are barking.
Well,
I thought for a minute it was mine.
we'll have to talk offline because I'm thinking in terms of like on our property, we have an event tent from May through the end of October. And with our mission really focusing on telling stories, I think it would be a fun event to consider and could highlight even some of the local authors and local books that we carry in the museum store. It just seems like there would be a connection and it would be an interesting collaboration to explore and something for the community. So
Oh, I'd love
A lot of the public libraries do them too, You should talk to your public library.
yeah.
And Somos has readings almost every day of the week.
I
it
know.
seems. You do a lot
We
there.
also sell local authors and poets books.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Well, good. This has been a
Such a treat.
lovely conversation, ladies.
I think it's a good example for an excuse for a road trip.
Yeah. So thinking as we were connecting with people on this topic for this conversation, what kind of emerged is there's such a high interest for people in writing memoirs that I think we're going to try to put together another Millicent Unplugged on writing, but focus it on memoirs, probably maybe in the fall. So we may be contacting you ladies then as well too. So I just want to say the museum is open 7 days a week now from 10 to 5. Currently, the New Mexico Pastel Society is having a show in our two big galleries, which is going on until June 2nd. And I want to thank Sarah for your time and being such a wonderful moderator for this program. Really appreciate you, Sarah. And again, thank you, ladies, for joining us. I did put everybody's website in the chat, and I will connect with you when I have the video processed and send you the link to share. Anything else, Sarah?
Nothing but major thanks to all. The amount of knowledge put out between everybody. I mean, that was high powered. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Lovely to
Yes,
meet
thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.